the global cost of disengagement and miscommunication. It's over $10 trillion a year. Only 1 in 12 of employees rated their leader as a very good listener. We are losing our listening in the world. You can see the effects of that all around you every single day.
Julian Treasure is a leading international speaker and trainer on effective communication, renowned for his insights on listening, speaking, and the power of sound in business. His 5 TED Talks have over 150 million views. Julian's engaging keynotes transform communication skills for leaders, sales teams, and professionals alike.
Everybody thinks they listen well. They don't. And I always ask the same question. How many of you have had formal vocal training? About 1%.
So what is the best technique for the people who are watching this? What are these tools to make the way they speak impactful?
Fortunately, there's a lot of research now that I can draw on. Well, the first thing is...
First of all, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I was looking for this one with a big interest because I've watched your TED Talks and everything you do about sound in general is very, very interesting to me. So I was thinking that would be great. And when you said yes, I couldn't believe. The first thing I just want to ask a simple question. Who is Julian Treasure? Because you have a very interesting background. So from economics, you were also in music, then printing, then marketing, then your own business, and then sound, listening, speaking. It's very unusual, very multifaceted. It's just very interesting. So I just want to understand, who are you actually, and how did you go through this trajectory?
Yes, you've done your homework, Annie. I'm very impressed. Well, I have a fundamental belief in going with the flow and doing what comes naturally and what's presented. So I'm not a great one for swimming against the tide. But obviously things happen in life where you have to respond. So yeah, I studied economics and I hated it, actually. I didn't want to do anything to do with that. I mean, that's another story why I hated economics at the time. I was unlucky to hit a particular moment in economics development, which I didn't take to. But when I left university, I became a musician and got very broke. I had 2 jobs. I worked in an advertising agency, and I've been very lucky in my career to have been in some seminal places at very interesting times. I mean, that was the beginning of the 80s, and it was Saatchi & Saatchi Garland Compton in London, which was a very dynamic agency run by Morris and Charles Saatchi. It was incredibly exciting. I was in a media department where almost everybody in that department is now media directors somewhere else. You know, it was full of really, really clever and excellent people. Then I had some time in music. Yes, advertising came before music. Then I went off and did music professionally, made some records, got very broke, got a job in selling advertising space and worked in a publishing company, which again turned out to be a seminal moment because it was computer publishing. I was working on a magazine called Computing, which is, mainframes. It was mainframes and minis in those days. But then somebody launched the PC. And, I remember the first ones coming out, the Osborne and things like that. But then suddenly this explosion happened and we were launching magazines every 5 minutes, PC this, PC that. So again, it was full of some very bright people who've all gone on to do bigger and better things. And it was an amazing place to be. And I worked my way up there to become marketing director and, went off and launched another company with some people, became marketing director, then left and launched my own business, producing customer magazines. And that was, it's almost like falling into things in my life. I mean, going with the flow. It's not like I've sat with a grand plan at any point and said, I want to end up being a TED speaker and an expert on sound and communication skills. That wasn't the plan. But I'm quite good at using the flow and, assessing where I am and working hard and making the most of it. So the magazine company was lovely. I had 15 years growing a company from just me to 150 people. And it was a beautiful company, which I then sold to a big American advertising group, which was very sad because they then absorbed it and it ceased to exist within 2 years, which was quite heartbreaking for me. But I launched another business then, having left that, called the Sound Agency, which was an audio branding company. I ran that for 20 years, answering the question, how does your brand sound? So this was my passion for sound, which, that came from a very, very young age. From my mother buying me The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra and Carnival of the Animals and Peter and the Wolf and things like that when I was about 6. So I fell in love with music at a very early age and learned to play instruments and to make music. And music still remains absolutely fundamental to my being. It's kind of a huge part of who I am. I can't hold a conversation with somebody if there's music playing. I don't understand how people can read books and listen to music at the same time. I can't do that because music sort of inhabits so much of me. So that listening and also playing develops your listening, because you're in a band or an orchestra. You have to listen to all of the other players at the same time. So it's a multi-track listening, and it's very attentive. And it's while you're doing something quite complicated, and often very complicated, especially if you're reading music, it's like reading music or something like that. It's, your whole brain is lit up when you're playing like that, which is why musicians have bigger brains than non-musicians. As I write in my book Sound Effects has a fair bit about this kind of stuff. It's about the wonder and power of sound and how sound affects us and how we affect the sound on the planet, and how important sound is and how important listening is. So the Sound Agency was working with brands, helping them to make decent sound, because most brands don't think about sound at all. They are totally obsessed with how things look, same as architects. But along the way, and I wrote a book called Sound Business, which was about that. I did my first TED Talk, which was based on the model I still use today of the 4 effects of sound, which we can talk about in a moment. And then another talk about sound and health. And then I had this epiphany. And the epiphany was, I kept thinking, why is it these organizations don't care or think about sound at all? And I realized, do you know what? It's because they're full of people who are not listening. That's the thing. We are losing our listening in the world. You can see the effects of that all around you every single day at the moment. Politics, just about every country. The politics of populism. Why is that happening? Because people didn't feel listened to by the politicians. Political leaders who surround themselves with yes people. In Russia, Putin never gets anybody disagreeing with him. Well, if you do, you get thrown out of a window, don't you? But in America, Trump is the same. Nobody disagrees with him. You don't get thrown out the window, you get sacked, but it's the end of your career nevertheless. So we have this kind of not listening going on. Not listening to the people, not listening to disagreement or challenge or difference. And it's all very dangerous. I mean, democracy relies on listening. So I had this epiphany. My third TED Talk was about listening. The fourth one was about architects not listening. And then I gave one about speaking, and that's the one that went completely ballistic, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because that has had at least 5 times as many views as my TED Talk on listening. To me, the foundational skill is listening. I tend to see communication as a pyramid, with listening at the foundation, speaking in the middle, and then presenting, public speaking, at the top. And not because it's more important, it's just more refined and directed. That's all. But the basis of the whole thing is listening. And this is the skill we're losing in the world right now.
No, I agree with you. And unfortunately, the question is, though, did we ever had this skill, listening? Because nobody teaches in school children how to listen. Actually, nobody even teaching how to speak. So we only teach how to read and write. And you would think, oh, these are the 2 most important things. Nothing else matters, right?
Well, that's true, Annie, but writing was only invented 5,000 years ago. So before that, we weren't teaching writing because it didn't exist. And, we've been around on this planet, Homo sapiens, for 300,000 years, give or take. So writing only 5,000 out of 300,000, only just over 1% of our existence have we had writing. And for the rest of the time, 99% of our existence, all human knowledge, connection, relationship, information, wonder. It's all been done by speaking and listening, since we invented language, which is probably half of that time, 150,000 years or something like that. But before that, we would have been making noises and communicating with each other in grunts and intonations and whatever. And of course, 3 million years of evolution before that, we had to listen. Listening is how you survive in the wild. If you're going into a dark cave to bed down for the night, you better be listening, because there might be something else in there already. You can see very well, and it's become kind of our primary sense. We're very ocular now, but you can't see in the dark and you can't see what's behind you. That's why listening is so important. It's such a critical survival skill. Well, it was. When I see people cycling around cities with headphones on, I think, well, we've really lost contact with that particular relationship.
No, absolutely. And I see daily people walking on the street with headphones. I just don't know how they survive, honestly. Even on a simple thing like crossing the road, it's crazy to do it with headphones on. But that's our reality today.
Virtual, unfortunately.
Virtual reality. Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll speak about this too, but towards the end. Now the more interesting topic and the question I wanted to ask you: what is more difficult, to teach people to speak with impact, or to teach them to listen, and why?
It's the second one, because, well, for two reasons. One, everybody thinks they listen well. They don't. But it's quite difficult, because you have to overcome that, where everybody thinks, oh yeah, I'm a good listener. Of course I am. So nobody recognizes, or very few people recognize that they have a problem there. Whereas with speaking, many people are frightened of particularly public speaking. So it's kind of acknowledged, and it's acceptable to have that stigma. But nobody's frightened of being a bad listener. So that's one very good reason why it's easier to teach speaking than listening. And the other is that people simply want to be heard. So there's an outbound, ego-driven, desire here, which is why my TED Talk on speaking has been seen by 5 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening, because everybody wants to be heard. But in a world where nobody's listening, that is not a great equation, unfortunately. So that's why, my passion and my purpose in the world now is to regenerate the world's listening. That's what it's about. Because, I see us moving in such a dangerous direction. Without listening, humanity has got no chance.
Unfortunately, that's true. And you mentioned that people think that everybody thinks that they are good listeners. How do you make them understand and realize they're not good listeners?
Well, fortunately, there's a lot of research now that I can draw on. I work mainly B2B these days. So a lot of the time I'm doing workshops for companies, for teams in companies, loosely couched as communication skills, which is a little bit easier to sell than conscious listening skills. But the research is out there. And, I've been doing some trawling recently. There are some terrifying numbers now available to us. For example, there are 2, I think, quite clear consequences of leaders particularly not listening, which are disengagement of teams, where people just don't feel they're into it because they're not being listened to. They don't feel they're being given due credit, or that their ideas are being dismissed, or whatever it may be. And the other one is miscommunication. People having to repeat things, people getting the wrong idea, doing the wrong thing because they misunderstood. Now, there is plenty of research now about the effect of these 2 things. And if I tell you the number they add up to in terms of the global cost of disengagement and miscommunication, it is absolutely stunning. It's over $10 trillion a year. 10 trillion. Now, that is a massive problem, but largely hidden, because again, most leaders think they're good listeners. Well, that's not true, actually. Again, that there's research now to validate this. Only 1 in 12 of a very large survey of employees, only 1 in 12 of them rated their leader as a very good listener.
Wow, that's a dismal number.
11 out of 12 leaders, not very good listeners. And so, this is my challenge now, I guess, in doing what I do, is to break through that kind of glass that's in between us, where the leaders all think they're doing fine, but they're not, and the cost is astronomical. So that's what I do a lot of, keynote speaking to bring this to people's attention. And then when I get back on social media, my social media person's been off for a while, so I've been very quiet. But when I get back onto it, this is what I need to be banging on about big time, so that people understand the problem. And then perhaps once you can shine light on a problem, you can do something about it. But if it's in the dark and you're not aware of it, there's nothing you can do, and it's just going to persist and grow.
Yep. No, 1 in 12. Gosh, this is like unbelievable number.
It's not surprising. When you think about leadership, as you get more senior in an organization, you're kind of supposed to know stuff, aren't you? And tell people things. So you're supposed to be kind of a shining example, somebody who's very capable, who knows the answers to everything. And listening isn't perhaps one of the top skills that leaders would think they have to develop. But of course it is. I mean, how can you possibly lead a team if you don't know what motivates them, what makes them tick, if you're not listening to their ambitions, their desires, their fears, their problems, their challenges? So a good listener, a good leader will always be a good listener. And unfortunately, I've worked in organizations, I expect you have too, where the leaders are very much in the tell camp. There's that old model of leadership: tell, sell, consult, or join. And you can move between them. Some leaders are very stuck in tell, and they don't listen at all. Or sell, even sell. If you're manipulating people and really firing them up with lots of dramatic selling type of leadership, well, that can work for a while. But ultimately, people burn out. They get bored. They get, what's my part in this? So there is a point at which you need to consult, listen to opinions, and join as well in the team and understand. Great generals have always done things like eat the same food as their troops to understand the state of the resources that they've got available to them. And listening is a huge part of that. If you don't listen in an organization, you don't hear the bad news. If you're shouty, aggressive, if you shoot the messenger, you don't hear the bad news. And you've got to hear the bad news in order to know what's going on. You've got to know what the challenges are, the threats. And it's critical that you do that. And that's through listening.
But the other thing is, you mentioned that leaders think that they have to know everything, and then they have to deliver that to people. And that's not true, because there is no such person, ideal person, that knows everything on this world. And if leaders get into that frame of mind, well, naturally, they're not going to listen, because they think, well, I'm the leader, that means I know everything, and you should listen to me, which is such an old-fashioned way of approaching leadership, in my opinion. But unfortunately,
you can say that, and there are many very good leaders who do listen in a more constructive way than that. But when you look at Trump,
oh yes,
the leadership of most of our countries is being done by people who are not doing that. And we are in it's a serious situation globally as a result of that.
Yeah, the thing is that we choose these people
because they speak into a resentment and an anger, and they channel that, and we demand a change. We demand somebody who's straight talking, honest, listens to the ordinary person. And so that's what populism is all about. And that's why you have the rise of Trump. And, in my country, oh my goodness, Farage is on the up. We have these people who are playing this tune, and it's a very popular tune with people who do feel disenfranchised. So again, as I said, I did a TEDx talk in Athens years ago, which was called The Sound of Democracy. And what I was saying there is that listening is the sound of democracy, because without listening and understanding people who are different, it becomes impossible to live in a country where 51 of you are running it, and there's 49 of me who don't agree at all. And what am I going to do if I'm not listening to you and understanding your point of view, and if you're not listening to me and taking that on board? You end up with Rwanda 20 years ago, where 1 minute you're next door to neighbors to somebody, and the next minute you're killing them with a machete. It's possible that this can all go terribly, terribly wrong very, very quickly if we're polarizing to that degree.
Not a thought that it's just difficult to even think about this, and that we are at this juncture in the 21st century.
And sorry, I don't want to don't want to bring it down into the whole thing.
Yeah,
the good
absolutely.
news is that the solution is enormously simple. We just start listening to each other. And, I teach in my workshops and in my coaching, I teach a tool which I call PAVE, which is a very important tool, I think, for conflict resolution and for dealing with this kind of thing. P stands for Paraphrase, which is that, so I say, Annie, what I just understood you to say is this: did I get you? So I check that I received what you sent in the right way, which is often not the case, so that does take out one big problem. The A is a very important piece, and that's I accept that you are right in your world. Now, you can be right in your world and very different from me being right in my world. We can have dramatically different opinions about things and both be right, because we live in different worlds. You've got your perspective, I've got mine. You've got your experience, I've got mine. We are different people. So I accept that you have a good reason for saying or believing what you say or believe, that you're right in your world. That means I can validate you. And that's the big thing that's missing in the world. And it's a critical part that comes from conscious listening. Validation sounds like, okay, Annie, I don't agree with what you said, but I understand why you would say that. It makes sense for you to believe that. Now, that's completely different from, Annie, that's crap, which is only going to lead to conflict. Validation is such a missing element in the world, and it's so easy to teach people to do. It's a different mindset. And it takes us out of this, headlong pursuit that we've all got into, opinionated dissing of people. I mean, you only have to look under any news story, even in quality newspapers, look at the comments and see the number of people who are just rude, obnoxious, opinionated, aggressive. Making people wrong is becoming an epidemic because we all love to be right. And the American author Harville Hendrix is somebody I have a great respect for, the inventor of the Imago method of couples counseling, and a really, really bright guy. He said, you can either be right or be in a relationship.
Great saying. For the people who are watching this, what can they do after the podcast to start listening? Is there any technique, anything that I can do daily so I can be more open and I can listen better?
Well, some of my work is teaching, transformational shifts, which hopefully once learned apply forever, make an enormous difference to people's perception. But there are some simple exercises as well, which help enormously with listening. One of them is silence. It's a very simple thing to do. Over half of the world's population now live in cities. And in my book, Sound Effects, I talk about the sound of cities and the noise that we make. The loudest city in the world, according to the UN table, is Dhaka in Bangladesh, which is averaging over 120 decibels. That's rock concert loud on average in the streets of Dhaka. That's terrifying. How people can exist in that kind of din is amazing. It's very bad for us to be surrounded with noise like that. Even 65 decibels is not good for us. I mean, that increases your risk of heart attack if you're exposed to that day after day, which, for example, the research shows teachers in German classrooms are, and probably classrooms all over the world. 65 decibels is the average noise level in German classrooms. With group work going on, that's, teachers have to almost shout to be heard. You work in that day after day, you're shortening your life. And that's a really frightening statistic. Silence is our friend. We lose contact with it in big cities. And I do urge everybody to get 3 minutes of silence a couple of times a day. That's all it takes. You don't have to meditate. You don't have to do anything particular. If you want to breathe or meditate, that's lovely too. Simply sitting in silence is really good for recalibrating your ears so that you can listen afresh and giving them a rest and reconnecting you with the baseline for all sound, which is silence. As Miles Davis said, it's the gaps between the notes that make the music. So silence is very important sound. So reconnect with silence, that's one. And then I think the other one is to understand that you can listen from different places. There are lots of people who talk about styles of listening. Active listening is a very popular one that constantly gets banged on about, especially in management training. Well, okay, that's one style of listening. It's not always appropriate. I talk about listening positions, different places to listen from, or different ways you can listen. And there are many, many, many of those. A very common one these days is distracted listening, which is, look at my device. No, I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
Apping away. No, you're sending a text. That's not really listening. It's distracted listening at best. Well, there's nothing wrong. I'm not saying any of these are wrong. It's not a question of being judgmental about them. It's a question of what's appropriate and being conscious of where you're listening from. So tapping away and half listening to somebody is fine if they're telling you a joke or having a bit of banter or it's trivial. But if they're pouring out their heart to you, that is very not going to work. That's a point at which you have to say, oh, hold on a second, let me just put this down and listen to you properly. Scott Peck said, you cannot truly listen to another person and do anything else at the same time. Well, I agree with that, but we can't go around doing that all our lives or we wouldn't get anything done. Yeah. So it's a question of being conscious, and that's the critical thing. So I don't use the phrase active listening very much. That's a technique in business. It's fine, or in relationships. I use the phrase conscious listening. And what I mean by that is being conscious that you're exercising a skill. Listening is not hearing. Hearing is a capability. Listening is a skill. So you're exercising a skill. You're doing work. It's work to listen. It's effort. And if you're conscious that you're doing it, you can be asking yourself a simple question. Where's the best place I could listen from in this? Am I listening in the right place for this conversation? In the right way? And there are, as I said, many, many listening positions that I go through in my workshops, and I talk about some of them in my book as well. So it becomes a fascinating new dimension to your life to move your listening position, to become a master listener, to listen in different ways in different situations, always appropriately. That changes everything.
Give me some other examples of listening positions. The one thing that you said with the phone, I experienced that with my kids. I talk to them and they just, yes. That's a daily thing. So I know this very well. Give me some other examples.
Well, you could call that distracted listening. And the other end of that spectrum might be focused listening, where I have an exercise called RASA, which helps people to move into focused listening. That is receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. So in a conversation, receive means look at the person, pay attention, don't be doing anything else. Appreciate is the little noises that oil the conversation. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Those kind of things, and gestures as well. Summarize is the word so. We've agreed this. Now we can move on to that. Or so what you said is this. Did I get you? Again, paraphrasing. And then the A is ask questions. Why, which, when, where, who. Those kind of open-ended questions that don't permit the answer yes or no. It's a very good way to engage in listening if you remember that simple acronym. So that's a focused form of listening, if you like. There's gender-based listening. Men and women tend to listen in slightly different ways. And there's lots of books about gender-based communication, pointing out the different ways that men and women tend to speak and tend to listen. There are scales. I mean, things like listening from fear. Well, that in COVID, that was a very common listening position where a lot of people were in fear of getting it, or of their loved ones getting it, or what would happen to the world, or, there was a lot of fear around, which is a very different thing from listening from faith, which may be religious faith, or it may simply be a conviction that all will be well, everything will be all right. It can be a spiritual thing. It can be a philosophical thing. It can be part of your values, if you like. You can listen from your values or not. You could be listening for the gold in what somebody says, which is to say always seeking what's of advantage to you. That's kind of critical listening, which is the most common form in business, which is weighing up, using Occam's razor, cutting aside things that are not relevant, just taking out the bits that are useful, and judging. There's a lot of critical judging in critical listening, as opposed to perhaps empathic listening, which you might want to be in at home a lot more, where you're going onto the other person's island, feeling their feelings, listening with your heart as well as your eyes and your ears, and really connecting with them on an emotional level and empathizing with them. So, those are just some examples. There are as many listening positions as anybody wants to create. The important thing is to be considering all the time, and it becomes a habit. You have to work at this for a while, and then, like any exercise, it becomes automatic. You are considering, is this the best place I could be listening from?
Yeah. Just like we are doing here, right? This is focused listening. Did you say RASA?
RASA. Yes.
RASA. Yeah. Okay. That's a good one. That's a very good one. All right. So let's switch gears to speaking, because speaking is very important also for so many people. How do people who are impactful speak? What are these tools they use to make the way they speak impactful?
I teach presentation skills and I coach people on these things. I do virtual coaching sessions very often with people who, for example, have got a TEDx talk coming up or some important form of public speaking coming up. And I work with them on both of the aspects of a powerful talk, content and delivery. So that's the first distinction that's useful to make. And I asked Chris Anderson a long time ago when I wrote my second book, How to Be Heard. I interviewed him for that book, and I asked Chris, which is more important in your view? Because Chris has seen more talks than anybody in the world, I should think. And he said, well, they're both very important, but if I had to choose, I would say content. If somebody's delivering earth-shattering content, but they're doing it in a very boring or amateurish way, I'll really try and stay with them. Whereas if somebody is delivering vapid nonsense and they're doing it brilliantly, it's just irritating. I think you have to think that content has to come first. It's no good being a genius orator if you're saying nonsense. So you have to think about what it is you're going to say to people. And I love the visualization of giving a gift, the best ever gift that you could ever imagine giving to like a 6-year-old for their birthday. And the feeling that you have as you're giving that gift to them, wrapped up, and you know how much they're going to love it, that is the feeling you need to have when you walk on stage to talk to an audience, whether it's 50 people or 5,000, doesn't make any difference. If you're giving a gift, and you should be, otherwise what are you doing there?
Yeah.
Then that's what to focus on. It's not about you. It's not about approbation. It's not about, am I going to look stupid? It doesn't matter. What matters is the gift and giving the gift to them. So once you've got that clear and you have a gift, and I train people on how to design that gift so that it's appropriate for the audience and so forth, then it comes down to the delivery. And I talk about the vocal toolbox in that TED talk that went completely ballistic, the different aspects of speaking, which most people don't think about. I said at the beginning of that talk, the human voice, it's the instrument we all play. And it is. It's an instrument. Would you go on stage at Carnegie Hall to give a piano recital having never had a lesson or practiced? I don't think so. So just in the same way, why would you go on stage or stand in front of a room and use this instrument having never had a lesson or practiced? And yet, I did a talk a couple of months ago in Copenhagen to like 3,000 chief execs and senior managers. And I always ask the same question: how many of you use your voice in your work? Importantly, how many of you is your voice a really critical tool that you use? They all put their hand up because they do media interviews, they stand up in front of teams, they have to pitch to investors, whatever it is, and the voice is critical. Okay, good. How many of you have had formal vocal training? About 1% generally is the answer. In any room, in any audience, it's always the same sort of proportion, about 1%. 1 in 100 people have actually gone out and had some training for their voice. Well, this is crazy. If the voice is important to you, go get some training. Work on it. I did. And, people often say, oh, that talk was so good, or I've just seen you talk and you're so grounded and confident. And training. It's training. I was not like this when I was 10 years old. And although some people are naturally gifted, maybe there's some talent that's innate involved, whatever, you can get trained. Wherever you start, you can climb the mountain and become an excellent speaker by training. So I talk about PPD, practice, prepare, and deliver. Practicing the skill of public speaking. If you want to be a good public speaker, you have to practice. It's just like if you want to be a good driver or, a good cyclist or a good pianist, you don't get there by just sitting looking at the thing. You actually have to go and do it and practice. So that's the first thing. And then preparing, there's a great deal. I've had almost everything that ever could go wrong in my talks. Actually, I did a talk 2 weeks ago in Sicily and forgot to pack a belt. And my trousers were literally on the point of falling down on the morning of the talk. So I actually had to jump in the car and go to a shoe shop and buy a belt because I thought to myself, that's one thing that's never happened to me, is my trousers actually falling down as I'm on stage in front of people. But I can do without that one. So, but pretty much everything else that could go wrong has gone wrong over the years. I mean, I've been speaking on stages for decades. And so I know how to preclude most of those things, how to make sure that they're not going to happen. And that's how I train people. So preparing is very important. Preparing the talk and, in the venue and understanding how to make that work very well. And then it's about delivery. And that's, it's like an Olympic athlete. You practice, you prepare for the event, and then they call it execute. I think deliver is a nicer word. So that's, once you've practiced and prepared, of course, it becomes much easier to deliver. My very first TED talk, which was about the four effects of sound, nobody had ever used sound in a TED talk before, so they were quite excited about it. And we had a rehearsal the night before. But before that, I'd done that talk probably 30 or 40 times to my daughter Alice, who was then about 10, I think. And so she was my audience sitting on a sofa. I had the TV screen behind me being the big screen at TED, and I had my clicker and my computer, and I ran it and ran it and ran it until it was completely in my DNA. Now, that is not in order to replicate an exact facsimile. That is so that I can jazz. And that's what it is all about to me. Great public speaking is not reading a thing or memorizing the words of a thing, because then you get hooked up in that mechanism. If you're reading it, you're looking down, you don't look at the audience. That's not good. And if you've memorized it, there's the terror of losing your thread, the chain breaking. And there's the effort of always a part of your brain is going, what comes next? What have I got to, what's that bit next? There's something in the way. What I love is just like a jazz band would be they know the chords well enough that they can improvise. That is the way I see public speaking. And that to me is great public speaking, where you know the tune well enough that you can stand there and improvise. So it's not the same every time. It comes out different depending on the relationship you have with the audience, or how you feel, or, you know, what you want to emphasize that day. And that is a beautiful place to be, because you can really focus on interrelating with the audience, that connection that you have with them, and making it work in that way. And it's being generated by you in real time, you know, from the heart. It's happening as people see it. And that is great public speaking.
You reminded me of my first ever speech. It was like maybe 25 years ago. I had to speak at the Euromoney conference. And I remember that I had a recorder. So I spoke my speech to the recorder, and then I would listen. And I did that the whole night until I listened to the voice, and I said, okay, that's fine. I can accept that. That sounds great. But I remember that. I remember very clearly. It was the first. And when I did my TEDx talk, I only have one. I prepared and I did everything, and I got on the stage and I start talking and the microphone doesn't work. And people start, we don't hear. And it's the worst, because you're out there, you know, delivering your best. And then I had to go back. And then they switched on the microphone. And then I cracked a joke. I can't remember what I said, but everybody laughed. And the second time was even better, because all the pressure has gone. It just disappeared. So I just went on the scene and I was just going. It was very good.
And often it is the case that when things go wrong, it gets people on your side, and it makes it more memorable. I mean, I've seen many people on the TED stage dry when they try to do a memory palace, or that, you know, they have a chain in their head and they break it and they lose their place and they go red and it look flustered and it all looks a disaster. What happens? The audience start to applaud every single time. It's what happens. People start clapping and saying, we're with you, don't worry about it, it's fine, we're patient. And, you know, so, I mean, again, in that talk in Copenhagen, I can tell you I had an incident about 2 minutes into my talk about leaders and listening and so forth. My Mac froze, beach ball, completely froze. The only solution was to reboot the Mac on stage in front of 3,000 people. And it's not ideal, you know. Now, fortunately, the compere, who was a very nice lady, came on stage and said, do you know, I saw you speak in Geneva 20 years ago and I still remember it. And we had a little chat about that while I was rebooting the computer and getting everything back up. And so got it back up, got the keynote back up. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen, we're back on. Big round of applause. Shook hands with her and said, thank you so much. And carried on in a very kind of sanguine way. And so many people came up to me afterwards and said, do you know, it was the best talk of the event because of the way you handled that nightmare. If you expect things to go wrong, it's not terrible. You know, I'm a big fan of being honest about what's actually happening, not pretending it's not happening, not pretending it shouldn't happen, because it did. And just dealing with, do you know what? My computer's frozen. I can't believe it would do this in front of all of you. I probably said something like that and laughed. And, you know, there's a connection there, because they can all identify with, oh my goodness, thank goodness it's not me having that happen to me. So what you did, I've seen that happen on telly as well. I've seen teleprompters break and people have to stop and then they fix it and then somebody starts and suddenly all that tension's gone and it's much easier now because, you know, there's a connection of a shared pain with the audience that everybody's gone through something there and we're together and we're going to make this work. So, you know, I'm not frightened of technical failures anymore at all. You simply deal with them in an honest, open and, you know, humble and human way, and the audience will love you for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All these events connect you with the audience. And sometimes people think, well, if I don't say, I mean, the audience doesn't know what you're going to say. You know, right? So you know what you're going to say. And then if you miss something and you think everybody know, but actually nobody knows apart from you. And that's a big kind of freeze for some people. And that was for me also in the beginning. I was like, oh my goodness, I missed that. And thinking this just ruins the rest of what I'm going to say. And then
My father, sorry, I don't mean to dive in and interrupt, but my father, you just reminded me, had a great phrase which has been close to me all the way through my life. It's a very useful one, which is the best is the enemy of the good.
Totally agree with you. Because the best experiences are when things didn't go perfectly, but you had something that was out of the way, unexpected. And then the only thing is your reaction. And in most of the cases, your reaction will make people support you. There's no other way. I mean, I've never seen anything else than that.
No, I mean, it's different if it's open mic night at a comedy club or something, then you're going to get heckled to pieces if things go not on a conference stage where people have come to listen. You know, there's a shared intention there. Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah. Let's talk about vocal toolbox, because that was something that when I was listening to your TED talk, that was so interesting. And although I know these things, I never thought about them in that particular order and the way you explain it. And it was very beneficial for me. So if you can just go into this and give a little bit examples, and what should people do to use their vocal toolbox better?
Well, the first thing is to be conscious that you've got one. So your voice isn't just a natural thing. It's you're given the equipment you're given. Obviously, you have a physical shape and you have vocal cords and so forth. But there's stuff that you can do to practice. And the overriding thing that I teach people in my workshops and in my coaching is to extend their range and to achieve variation. Those things are very important because, you know, if you have a very boring voice and you speak all on one note and there's hardly any inflection whatsoever, you're going to put people to sleep extremely quickly. So there are ways of speaking which people have habits of. These are habits. These are not physically determined things generally. And you can break those habits by going to the gym, by picking up the tools and becoming an expert at using them. So, for example, let's deal with that kind of monotony, of course, is the word monotone, monotony, boring. Well, you can work on that if you have very restricted prosody or intonation. I mean, prosody is not just intonation, it's also the pacing and the emphasis you put on words, but largely intonation. If you have very restricted intonation, you can practice. And the exercise I give people for that is to get a book of poems and sit at home reading the poems out loud with enormously exaggerated intonation and prosody to exercise that muscle and extend the range so that next time you come to speak naturally, you've got more range to deal with. You're not restricted in that habitual little zone that you've locked yourself into. So, you know, when I say, you know, very exaggerated, all this kind of stuff, very, very out there, much, much more than you would ever do to another person or on stage, unless you're in an extreme emotional crisis. And just doing that, practicing it, it's like going to the gym. You know, you do this exercise in the gym, and you don't do that because this is what you're going to do in life. You do that because you want to be strong to do other things. And it's just in the same way with this kind of exercise. So that's one important thing. And the same applies to pace and to silence in speaking. One of the biggest errors I see people making with the vocal toolbox is trying to fill every moment with speaking. And that tends to give rise to the ums, ers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Little verbal tics. You need to become, it's another very important reason, by the way, to become comfortable with silence. Because if you're very comfortable with silence in a talk, you can be standing on stage and you can make a point and then stop and let it settle. And nobody's uncomfortable with that. But so many speakers are, they think, oh, it's disastrous. It's not so easy on radio. We've got video here so people could see I hadn't gone away.
Yeah.
But if this had been audio only, you can only stop for so long because people start thinking
wondering.
that they've lost the signal and they changed in the old days, the band or channel or whatever it was. So silence is a tremendous aid. Being comfortable with it means that you can use it to emphasize things. And that means that you can vary your pace a great deal more. You can get really excited and go very quickly, or you can slow right down and stop. Now, again, variation is critical. If you want to keep people alive and alert I stand on stage and do up to 60 minutes, sometimes even 90 minutes of a keynote. That's quite a long keynote. And if you're going to keep people engaged for that long, you can't be doing the same thing all the time. It's good to change their state. I mean, you remember in my TED talk, the one about speaking, I had everybody stand up and do vocal exercise, which changed. So, that changes the body chemistry. It releases happy hormones into your body because you've just done something. You've moved. You've got maybe some endorphins or oxytocin or something going around that stimulates you a little bit. Just like with Amy Cuddy's famous TED talk about power poses, which release testosterone into the body. So you can certainly do that if you feel nervous and do a few power poses. And if you haven't seen that one, that's worth checking out.
I haven't seen this one. I'll check it.
Okay, so it's the second most watched TED talk of all time, that one. It was challenged because people tried to repeat the experiments that she had done in her lab, where she found that power poses are anything that makes you bigger. So it's like if you score a goal, you stick your arms in the air and stick your chest out, and that is a power pose. The classic power pose is arms aloft. What she found is that doing a power pose, any power pose, releases testosterone, and testosterone is a hormone that makes you feel stronger and more confident for men and for women. So it's a very useful thing to do if you're nervous before a talk. Go into a quiet corner somewhere where people can't see you and do some power poses. So anything that makes you bigger. I mean, it doesn't have to be the arms up. It can just be expanding yourself a little bit. They all release testosterone. They're all good for that. There are many aspects to the vocal toolbox: pace, pitch, prosody, silence. Pitch, that's how high or low you speak. And if you want to speak powerfully, it's quite useful to adopt a practice of resonating in your chest. So, if I speak in my head voice up here, that's perfectly normal and there's nothing wrong with it. But if I move down and resonate in my chest here, that gives me more authority, because we tend to associate deep sounds with significance. And there's a reason for that, because over hundreds of thousands of years, we have learned that big things have deeper voices than little things, and big things are more threatening or important than little things. So you want to pay more attention to an elephant than to a mouse. And that's where this kind of genetic association of depth with significance comes from. But it's right across the board. The research shows that we vote for politicians with deeper voices. Some people have got very nasal voices up here. Well, you can work on that. And again, I am always saying to people, I'm not a vocal coach, but I teach people about the toolbox and then send them off to go and find a singing coach, a drama coach, a speaking coach, a presentation coach, whatever it may be, to do the work with somebody who really understands and can work with them on breathing and diaphragm control and posture and all these kind of things.
We're towards the end. I had many more questions, but we are limited in time, unfortunately. And my last question is about the future and all the AI voices that come out. And what will be there left for us, for the human voice, in the future of AI?
That is a great question. And it's one of my core topics now that I keynote on, as well as leadership listening and powerful speaking and presentation skills and listening generally, is the importance of speaking and listening, of conscious communication in the AI age. Because I think what's left is human connection. I think it'll be a very long time before AI can actually connect in the way that two humans can, because there's a lot more to it than just words and intellect. So, I can understand you and respond to you, and, we can have a rational conversation, but that's very different from somebody you really like, who you know really, really well, one of your best friends, or somebody you've worked with for years and years and years, who you really know and appreciate. And so, I did a talk last year to a lot of very senior real estate people in America, realtors. And AI can present you with a list of ideal properties in half a second. So what's the point of a realtor anymore, or real estate agent in the UK? Well, the answer is, the point of them is that there's somebody who really knows you. Now, if it's not that, they're not going to survive because they have no function. It's just like a financial advisor, somebody who knows you. It's not about what's the best investment, where you're going to get 0.1% more. It's about, what are your life goals? What is wealth really about to you? How are you going to achieve that? It's not just about money, is it? Real wealth. And how can I help you to achieve that? So it's somebody who knows you at a heart level. That's why you would want to work with that person, because they're the person who's going to come to you and say, you know what, Annie, let me tell you about something. I don't think you will have thought of this, and it's not something you would normally like, but I think you're going to love this. Whether it's a property or an investment vehicle, or, some way of making money, whatever it might be, these are the people who are going to be able to surprise and delight you because they know you. Now, I'm not sure an AI can do that. Possibly, if it's with you, if you have a particular GPT you've designed and you have 10 years training it on everything, it might know you as well as your best friend. I don't know. Whether it would treat you like your best friend, I doubt. Because what's its agenda? What's its objective? It's a machine. Until they become self-aware, and at that point we need to be worried about, are we going to exist at all? I think human connection, and this is really what I keep saying, in a world where young people don't like making phone calls, they'd rather send a text, where young people are they're not comfortable with face-to-face communication, with audio communication. That's a real issue when AI can respond far better in text than most people can, and faster and more comprehensively. Yep. So if you're only existing in text, you're going to get replaced. Where we can relate with each other uniquely is like this. It's in a human conversation where you're looking at somebody, they're responding to you, and, there's a connection, which is more than simply words and rationality, I think. So
no, absolutely.
I think these skills of conscious listening and powerful speaking become invaluable in an AI world.
Absolutely. You said it so well that if you're only texting and communicating this way, you will be replaced. Yeah. I never looked at it from that point, but it's so self-explanatory, really. Well, thank you so much once again. And thank you. I appreciate so much what you do and all your TED Talks and everything that you've come up with. It's so helpful. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Annie. And I'd like to invite you and all your listeners also to join me in this, the Listening Society, which is my online community / resource for anybody who's interested in listening better, speaking better, or the power and wonder of sound. So I'll send you a link which will give you and your audience a month's free trial to come and try the Listening Society out and see if you like it. It's only £1 a day to be a member anyway, but we'll give you a free trial, and there's lots of stuff in there, including my entire 7-hour, 9-chapter training course on speaking and listening skills. That's in there for everybody, for the members, free of charge for them. So
amazing.
It's worth coming in, and I'd love to see you in there, and also everybody listening to this, come and join us and
amazing.
Work on that listening skill.
That's great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a delight.